So this morning, the passage from the Old Testament, Jonah, and the passage from the Gospel of Matthew really hit me hard because I'm one of those folks who tends to belabor fairness. You know, I can often find myself saying it's to myself. Hopefully I don't say it to you all. It's just not fair. You know, life is just not fair. It's just not right. And it also recalls to me the passage from Isaiah, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor your ways my ways. We have a continuation of a theme this morning in the Gospel of Matthew. Over the past few weeks, God's ways in the kingdom reverse themselves. We've heard the story about Jesus healing the Canaanite woman, about Jesus calling Peter Satan and to get behind him, to forgive our neighbors not 7 times, but 77 times. And God's immense generosity and love to those maybe who don't yet believe. And for those of us who study scriptures and who take this, open up books and read it, this part of Matthew is called the Great Reversal. I've mentioned a few times before that often the passage or the stories or the parables that precede the Sunday gospel are just as important, maybe even at times more important than the gospel itself, because it gives a great context and understanding that we might not get. And just before today's reading, which we didn't read in the previous weeks, 2 things have happened. Matthew's version of the rich young man coming to talk to Jesus and how he can be saved, and Jesus saying, sell all that you have and come follow me, and the rich young man's realization that he isn't quite ready to do that. And then we also have the disciples talking to Jesus and asking, well, what do we get? You know, we've come and followed you. What are we going to get? And so then Jesus follows up with this parable of the landowner who goes out early in the morning, as I was telling the children, at 6 a.m., let's say, and gets some workers. And then he goes out 4 more times. Think of that as how often God comes to us. Right? He goes out 4 more times to bring more laborers into the vineyard to do some work. And everything is going fine. All is okay until the landowner chooses to pay them. Imagine, people who had agreed to work 12 hours for a certain wage are upset because those who worked less than them get the same wage. One of the things I love to do in Scripture is to place myself in the scene and wonder what I would be doing. Sometimes it's even fun to think about, who do you decide to be? Or do you decide to be in the crowd so that you don't have to take any responsibility for what's going on? But anyhow, I know how I'd feel if I was one of those 6 a.m. folks who worked all day, had to mop my brow 10, 15 times during the day, dripping in sweat. I'd probably be upset, envious, irritated. But I would reflect on that, and I would hope that I would find a way to be appreciative and thankful for what I had received. And then the last passage of this morning's gospel read, and the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. And so, what does Jesus mean when Jesus says those words that we've heard so often? And I'm going to tell you a little story from the late 1800s. And late 1800s, the evolution of the telegraph, and so there was quite a bit of competition for anybody that could decipher the dots and the dashes. And so there was this company that had great wealth and a great reputation, and they could hire the best, and they just happened to have an opening for a Morse code operator. And on that morning, 20 young men showed up for the job and the interview. And it was noisy as heck. You know, one of those huge rooms, and there was telegraphs banging away, and there were typewriters banging away, so that the receptionist had to shout over all this noise and tell them what they needed to do. And what they needed to do was to take an application, fill it out, bring it up to her, and have a seat. And so they did that. And it was 3 hours later, and they still hadn't been called. And all of a sudden, this latecomer comes in, goes up to the lady, asks the question. The lady gives him an application. He sits down, starts filling it out. 5 minutes into doing the application, he stands up, goes over to the lady, and says, "I have to see the hiring manager right away." Who's this guy? Well, lo and behold, guess what happens? She lets this guy in. And everybody outside's a little upset, as you can imagine. And then about 5 minutes later, the receptionist stands up and announces that the job has been filled. You're free to go. Whoo! Right? I just heard it. So one of those guys wasn't going to take this laying down. And he decided to stay around and do some talking. So he went up to the receptionist. He said, "It's just not fair. This person came here late, didn't even fill out his application. We never had a chance." And then the receptionist told him, "The entire time that you have been here, there's been a telegraph in the background sounding out in dots and dashes. If you understand this message, go to the receptionist and tell her that you need to see the hiring manager right away. The job is yours." Only the latecomer heard the message, right? All the other candidates had missed it. So it is, so it might be, so it will be with the various laborers in the field, which include us, who work for whatever portion of the day is ahead at the point they were hired. And it is not for them to judge what the landowner does with their resources. They agreed to the standard wage, didn't they? But those unhappy good laborers who came in the beginning and broke their backs in the hot sun are far from content. There comes that word, it's just not fair. Even though their employer had kept their word, had met the letter of the law, look at those lazy fellows over there. They just come for an hour or two and they get paid the exact same amount we got. I mean, I should be rewarded for my superiority and discipline. Those folks just lazy. I mean, I could have stayed home and still fed my family and only worked 2 hours. So what are we hearing here? We're hearing what I think is classic humanity at work, aren't we? And that such gut responses as all that are not easily answered. There's a kind of justice and mercy here that we cannot comprehend because, I hate to tell y'all, but we're not God. We're not supposed to be God. We are asked to trust God and rest assured that our obedience matters, not our rational understanding. For in the face of personal tragedy or crisis or irritation, there are those of us, me included, whose anger sometimes make us say that God is just not fair. Just like the laborers argued against the landowner that it wasn't fair. However, if we are honest with ourselves and we reflect and pursue deeper on this, I think we ask a different question. Because the question is, do we really want God simply to be fair? Do we really want God to give us just what we deserve? Because the wonder of grace is that deserving has absolutely nothing to do with it. The limitless grace and mercy of God poured out freely on us, not because we deserve it, but because God is just that full of love and abundantly generous. If we receive from God only what we deserve, we would be a wretched lot indeed. But our sinful and wayward lives are not met with judgment, but are met with lavish and abundant love and grace. Thanks be to God.